Hi, this video is going to talk about the use of JSON files and how we can manipulate them with Python. So there are three examples that we will talk about that have to deal with an earthquake file. And you can go online and you will be able to find these earthquake files. And I'll be showing you the URL in the second example. But you can also actually import this the actual file itself and download it. So in this particular example, in example one, I am going to be, first of all, I'm going to be adding the actual JSON file to my Google Colab. And if you remember correctly, what you would do is you click on this button. Now I've already added it, so I don't think I would need to add it here, but you click on it and you upload it. And here it is. It's my earthquake data JSON file. All right. So this is the first way that I'm showing you that you have already taken the file, you've downloaded it, and you've added it on resident to your machine. Okay. Now, if you remember with Colab recycles these files every day. So tomorrow when I go in, this file won't be there and I would have to upload it again. All right. On Sublime or PyCharm, or if you're using Jupyter Notebook, that's a whole different story because then the files are actually resident on your machine. So with that being said, the first thing we have to do with the JSON to get this, be able to read this JSON file is we have to actually import JSON. JSON is a library. We need to import it. And we also have to import a couple of other things. So we go to Plotty. So that's another library. And within Plotty, we're going to import scatter geo and layout. And then we're also going to import offline, meaning we're going to be able to put the map offline. All right. So this particular example that I'm going to show you here is actually going to take this file. So I have this file. So this code here is, here's my file, and it's, equal earthquake data 1, and it is exactly the name of my file over here. So this is the name of my file, and I'm moving it into a variable. The variable I'm calling it is file name. I could have called this anything, but I'm calling it file name for this purposes. And then I'm saying with open, and I'm using the name file name because that's what I called it, right? I moved it into this variable file name. With open file name, and now I'm going to call it as F. So I've kind of renamed it, and I've renamed it to to this name F, because now it is no longer a variable, it is a file. And I say, the next thing I say, I wish I could just move my cursor over, but it keeps doing that. The next line of code is then all equal earthquake data, all EQ data equals JSON load F. So F, remember, F is the name of the file. We just called it F. So we have to say JSON load F, and now we're loading it into a dictionary, and we're calling that dictionary all earthquake data. Okay, so this is an important component that is very similar to all JSON files when you're going to be just having them in resident and then opening them. You have to open them, and then you have to put them into some type of either a file or a dictionary. All right, so then we're saying, we're looking at this particular thing, and we say title all earthquake data, and then we're saying all of these all earthquake dictionaries equal the dictionaries. Now, the reason we're doing this is if you were to open up this file, you would see that it starts out with metadata, and then it has features. And features is the actual data that is in the file. The metadata is kind of the header, but we want to get to the features. So within the features, we are looking at these particular items, our magnitude, our longitude, latitude, and then some text. All right. So we look at our earthquake in our dictionary, our earthquake dictionary here, because remember we called this up here all EQ Dicks, meaning all of our earthquake dictionaries. So in our earthquake dictionary, we have then properties, and within the properties, we are going to be getting the magnitude, the coordinates, and we're going to be getting a title. So this is going to read for all of the elements, the EQ Dicks. So see the for loop for all of those in all EQ dictionaries, which is what we moved our data to. We're going to read through every one, getting, you know, the magnitude, the coordinates, and the properties in the title.
I thought I would show you the file that we're dealing with. Our first step was to import JSON. And what you should basically think of this JSON module is an interpreter. And what it does is it takes a JSON file that is a JSON object and interprets it into a Python object that we can then work with in our Python language. Now, the next step was to import Plotly, which is the graphing program that we will use. The thing about this graphic routine that we use is that we're going to import this offline module. And then what that's going to do is it's going to give our output as HTML file, and that way we can open it in the browser window. And the nice thing about it is that it automatically resizes it according to whatever browser you're using. So the next step in the code was to then essentially import the JSON file. And we give it a name. So we identify the file that we want to deal with, and that's this JSON file. And I thought I'd show you what this JSON file looks like. So if we open it up here, what we see is what looks like a dictionary. A dictionary meaning it starts with these curly brackets, and then it has a key, followed by a colon, followed by a value, and then separated from another key value pair. In this case, we have a key called metadata, and then value is actually a dictionary. But it's not. It's not a Python dictionary. What it is, as we can see up here, it's a JSON file. It's actually a GeoJSON file. GeoJSON is a subgroup of JSON that deals with geographical information. So it's a subtype of JSON. It's a special type of JSON file. Now, what we need to do then is to take this file, which is a JSON file, and convert it into a Python file that we can work with in Python. And the way we do that is, again, using this JSON module. So going back to our code then, the first thing we do is we identify it here by giving it a file name, and then we open it here. And we then have this JSON load routine of the file we just identified. And so the way to think of this is that this step here, it loads the JSON file and interprets it into memory, and interprets it here as a Python file. So here we've taken the JSON data and converted it into a Python file. So now when we look at it, coming back here, we can think of this as a Python dictionary, because that's exactly what it is now. It's been converted by this JSON load step into a Python dictionary and that we can work with. So now we have our Python dictionary. So then the next step here is to start looking at it here. And the first thing we want to do is we're going to give it a title. And so what we do is we look at this now Python dictionary that we call all Equidata here. And our title, we're going to look at a value that's found under metadata. And under metadata, it's going to be found under title. So if we go to our code here and we see, well, our first key here is type. Well, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for a key named metadata, which is here. And then we can see from here that we're then looking for essentially a sub-dictionary, a sub-key. So again, here's our metadata, and look, what's the key value here? It's a dictionary. So we're going to go looking through this dictionary for something called title. So let's start looking. Here it is right down here. Here's a subkey called title, and it's USGS magnitude 1 or greater, earthquakes past. So that's going to be our title. So we've then extracted from the data, that Python dictionary, a title. That's where we found it. And then our next step is to then define another object that we'll call all Equidix. And what's that's going to be, it's going to look at all Equidata, and it's going to extract the values that we find under the key features. And we can sort of get a hint that what the values are going to be is a set of dictionaries. So if we then go looking here, so now we're looking, again, what we're looking for is features. Here it is. Here's our key called features. And what is features? It's a list. And what is it? It's a list of dictionaries. So you can see it starts here, list of dictionaries, and then it goes all the way down until it ends. What it's going to do then, it's going to create a list of dictionaries. So coming back here, so what we've now done is this all Equidix here is going to be this list of dictionaries that we found under features in the data file. Then our next step here is to start scrolling through these dictionaries that we've just identified, we've just extracted. And we'll look at here for each dictionary in all these dictionaries, we're going to then extract from the properties key subkey a value that we call mags, which means magnitude. And we're going to add it to a list. Here we create an empty list of mags, also longitude, latitude, hover text. And here we create empty lists, and then we're going to start appending as we extract them. So we're going to get a list of magnitudes, and then we're going to get a list of coordinates, 0 and 1 for longitude and latitude. And then we're going to get some titles for each one. Now, so we go back here and we start the process, then we go through the first dictionary and extract, look under properties, extract magnitude. So if we go here, here's where our first dictionary began. So what's the first thing? Type. Well, that's not the key we're looking for. We're looking for properties. Here it is. Here's properties. Well, under properties, what are we looking for? We're looking for mag, for the magnitude. So here was our Here's where a dictionary began. Here's where properties are. And now we're looking for something called mag, for magnitude. And so here's a subkey called mag. And so, and it's got a value of 1.18. So that's the magnitude of that earthquake. So then what happens is we take that value of 1.18 and we add it to the mags dictionary that we just created. Next, we then go looking under same dictionary under the key geometry for coordinates. Coordinate 0, which will give us the longitude, and coordinate 1, which will give us the latitude. So we go looking under geometry, and it's a dictionary for a subkey called coordinates. Well, here's coordinates. So then we extract our latitude as the first value and our longitude as the second value of that. Then lastly, we go looking for under properties, the title. And then we're going to add that to our dictionary as a hover text. So coming back here under here's where it began under properties. We then look for a title. Here's the title. And so the title then is going to be magnitude 1.2 to 7 kilometers west-northwest of Cobb, California. So that's the title of the first key. And then we then start to the second, in this case, the second dictionary, and go through the same process, which will add more values to our dictionaries here. So that basically explains how to interpret the data and what's going on in this code. And then when we go to map it, we're going to map it according to these dictionaries we've created, named the longitude, the latitude, these hover texts, which are these titles we've added to it. And we're going to then, in this case, here, we're going to change the size of the markers according to the magnitude. So that's where our magnitude will come in on our final display. And so the final display, if you notice, will then have the magnitude according to the size of the marker for each one. And if you hover over it, you'll get the title, that is the location of where the earthquake occurred. So I hope that helps to clarify the data that's being incorporated into our program here.
Okay, so it might help for you to understand here, how did we come to this? So when we look at our actual data, which is the dictionary, we see that we have here are all of the different items that we are going to be using for our map. So this part here, the map, is the actual components of the map that we will fill in based upon what we get here from our dictionary. All right. So we have all of these different items. Through the for loop, we fill our map up with all of our data. And then we say my layout equals layout title earthquakes. And then here, this is pretty much, something you could just copy. So our figure is data. Well, where does this data come from? Well, here's the data right up here, right? Our figure is data, and our layout is, well, how's our layout? We defined it up here. We said our layout was going to be my layout. So let's see, where do we have that my layout? Oh, here, we say my layout. So here we defined it that my layout, how I'm going to, this is a variable that I created, could have been Conrad's layout, is going to be the layout with the title of earthquakes. Okay, So, and the data is going to be based upon this data here that we have completed in this. This is it is a list, because we know it's a list because we have the square bracket. It is a list of dictionaries. So we can see here we have the beginning and end of the list. Here we have dictionary. And within this dictionary now, we have for each item within the longitude and latitude, we're going to have the magnitude, the color scale within each particular item. So it's a dictionary and a dictionary within a dictionary. We close both the dictionaries up and then we close it. There's our file. Okay. So, and then we do this offline plot, and we're going to call our file name Global Earthquake HTML. Now, here we see global. So when we run it, so let's run it here. And we see that it ran, because well, we think it ran. And actually all we see here is this particular HTML. Now I could go and I could open up, open up a browser window and look for it, because what it did is it created a browser. It created an HTML link, but I want to display it here within Colab. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import IPython. IPython allows us to display it right within here. And I'm going to just delete that there. Okay. I'm going to delete all these things here. So let me just start from the beginning here so you see it all happening. All right. So you don't think that this is fake. All right, get rid of that guy too. All right, and we'll get rid of that one too. Okay, so I think we're in a good place now. All right, so now this was our initial one. We know it came from this file, earthquake data, which we uploaded. We run it, boom. We run it, we get this HTML, but we want to display this HTML. So this is code you can just copy. We import IPython, make sure that your system has it. If not, you'll have to go to terminal and do the pip to import it, because it's a library. And we just say import dot display HTML file name. Well, what's our file name? It's global earthquake.html. So we're going to display this. So now if we click here, we run it. Voila. Here is our map of the earthquakes. And we have different colors here because what did we say? We said here that we would have different colors based upon the magnitude. All right, so that's the first thing. But now let's say that we wanted to read this file and it was actually going to be coming from a URL. That means that we're not going to be loading it to our system. We're not going to have this. Instead, we're just going to go to the URL and we're going to read it from there. So the first thing is, in this particular method, we're going to use the import URL lib library. So from the URL lib library, we import this URL open. All right, so here is the method within this library. And you notice it's URL.request. So that within the method request, we're going to import the open. Then we are going to import JSON. So now we're similar to what we did in the last exercise. And we're going to say, import JSON, and then it says, store the URL in URL as a parameter of the URL open. Okay, so what that means is that we're going to take this information and we're going to store it, and we're storing it here in this variable called response. This could have been called anything, but we're going with, by saying URL open URL, it says, okay, and here we have our URL, right? So you could just take this code and put a different URL in, and it would work with lots of different things. So this is kind of a standard piece of code just to hang on for future reference. So URL open, our URL, which is our earthquake data, and we're putting it in this variable called response. It could have been called anything, okay? All right. Now we need to take this. Now this is just a variable. It isn't in a dictionary. It isn't in a file. It's just like a string. Okay. We've just moved it into a string in working memory so we can work with it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use this particular code. So we're going to move it into something called data. Okay, so hang on. So we have this command JSON.loads. We use the method loads response read. So we're going to read all of the data in this particular variable, and we're going to store it into this particular file called data. Now, we want to print this data to see what it looks like. So what I'm doing here now is something you should do with all of your JSON files, because you don't know what that data really looks like unless they've given you a file format. So this allows you to then go and look at how the data is stored. So here we see, oh, look, this data is stored as a dictionary. We know that because it starts out with the curly bracket. It has the type here, and now we get to the metadata. So that was our first piece of information. And if we were to keep going, there's a ton of data here. If we were to keep going, we'll just go a little bit. It starts to tell the coordinates and all of the information. So, and that's actually under something, that's where we start to read after we're finished with the metadata. Because if you see here, here's feature. So we finished our metadata. So I just want to make sure you understood that. So here was our metadata here. And then after our metadata, we go right into features. Okay, so you want to take a look at this data to understand what you're doing here. Because within each entry, there's going to be a piece called geometry and then the features of the earthquake. Okay, so this is just allowing us to see what our data is. It's not actually doing our earthquake yet. It just printed our data. But now the next piece is we want to actually take it and print our earthquake map. So, okay, it looks very similar. Our import, our URL lib from this is all the same, URL lib import. Okay, here's our URL. We're going to store it in response. Okay, now here is where we get a little tricky here. So now we say, okay, we're going to take this particular response, which is a variable that we've loaded stuff in. We're going to read it and we're going to put it into this particular, into something called data name, data one. All right. And then we're going to say our file name, we're going to call data two. All right. So what we do say is we open up our file name. So we're saying we open file name as W, and now we're going to call it F, and we take this data one, which is all the data that we loaded, right? Here it is, this data one. It was our variable, this data one, and now we are going to dump it into F. And now it's F that we're going to be working with. So F becomes our file that we're going to be using to actually do our graphing. So once again, now we're here where we're taking from Plotty and graphs. We're taking from Plotty this method graphed objects. We're importing scattergrow, same as the last one. So this is all the same code as before. And now we are back here with, we open our file name, which our file name is F. We've already determined that. Okay, and we're saying all of our earthquake data is JSON load F. So now we're just taking this F and we are loading it into all of our earthquake data, which now is a dictionary. And we're saying for all of our earthquake data, we want to just look at the features. So this is the exact same code as it was before. It's going to read all of the elements within the dictionary, and then it's going to map it out exactly the same. So when we run it, we get our same HTML. And remember, we can't display that. We would have to, we could open up a browser window. I could copy the path if I wanted to, and I could paste it. And nope, guess not. I would need to do a Control O and go there, but I'm not going to do that right now. So let me just go back. But what I am going to do then is just use the import IPython, and we do the exact same thing. And voila, here's our earthquakes. Now, one last way that you could do this is, I know that we've done where we had the file and we actually downloaded it. We used the last one, we used the URL lib to be able to just read it from the URL. But another way to read it directly from the URL, which is much simpler, is something called request. And you're saying, why did you even show us the other one if this is so much simpler? I showed it to you because I want you to know that there are multiple ways to be able to do something. So here we are going to import the library called requests. And request is actually a library that's being modified. It is the most contemporary way to be able to read JSON files online and use them in Python programs. Here we have our same thing, our plotty, and we're importing these things. Now, here's the only difference. So we say our response. Now, remember, response was just the string, the repository for when we just took all of our data from our website and we moved it. So we use this request get. Okay, request get. And so it's request get this data and move it into response. And then we say, so here we have a method here, and we're saying response, our data to this method equals move it into this all earthquake data. And then we, once again, all we do now is we say all earthquake data. It is a file, and we already know that our earthquake data is a file with dictionaries embedded within it. So we take our earthquake data and we get the elements that we want from the features. Here it is. And we say for earthquake dictionary in our all earthquake dictionaries. So for each item that we're going to look at, so this could be for X in our earthquake dictionary, pick out these 4 items. Here we're going to finish it up. We're going to map it. Here we have the same thing, my layout. So all this is exactly the same. Let's get rid of that. We'll run it. Produces the exact same HTML. We use our exact same import Python to be able to display it. And here it is. So I have shown you 3 ways to manipulate data from a JSON file. The first way was that you actually downloaded the JSON file. Here it was. The second way was that you used URL lib. And the third way was that you used the request. Hopefully this will be helpful for you as you're doing your homework.